My name is Catherine Reynolds and I'm 52 years old. I never thought I'd be telling this story, but sometimes life forces your hand in ways you never expect. I've been divorced for 12 years now. After 20 years of what I thought was a decent marriage to David, we have 2 children together. My daughter Sophia, who just turned 28, and my son James, who's 24. Looking back, I can see how my entire life has been shaped by sacrifice. Growing up in a middle-class suburban neighborhood outside Philadelphia, I was raised to believe that a woman's greatest virtue was her selflessness. My mother demonstrated this daily, catering to my father's every need while putting her own dreams on hold. I promised myself I'd never follow that path, yet somehow I ended up walking directly in her footsteps. I met David during my second year of college. I was studying architecture with dreams of designing sustainable buildings that would transform urban landscapes. He was in his final year of business school, charismatic and ambitious. When we fell in love, it felt like the perfect match. His drive and my creativity seemed complementary. We married a year after I graduated, and I landed a position at a promising architectural firm. Then I got pregnant with Sophia. It wasn't planned, but we were excited. David's career was taking off, with frequent relocation opportunities that promised rapid advancement. When he was offered a significant promotion that required moving across the country, we had a decision to make. I was just establishing myself professionally, but his salary would be triple what we were making combined. "It's just temporary," he assured me as I resigned from my position. "Once we're settled, you can find something new. This is for our family's future." That temporary arrangement became our permanent reality. With each move for David's career, 5 cities in 8 years, I put my professional aspirations on hold. Between managing our household, raising our children, and supporting David's increasingly demanding career, my architecture degree gathered dust. I took on freelance design work when I could, but it was always secondary to everything else. The real estate investments were my idea. Since I couldn't practice architecture the way I dreamed, I channeled my knowledge into something productive. I convinced David to let me use a portion of his bonuses to purchase distressed properties, which I would redesign and flip for profit. It started small, but over time, it grew into something substantial. These investments were in my name since I managed everything, though David often reminded me that his money made it all possible. I tried not to resent him for this. After all, we were a team. But the imbalance grew over time, especially as he became more distant, working longer hours and traveling more frequently. The children became primarily my responsibility, and while I loved being their mother, I sometimes mourned the career I'd abandoned. When Sophia was 16 and James 12, I discovered the affair. David had been seeing his administrative assistant for nearly 2 years. The betrayal cut deep, not just because of the infidelity, but because of all I had sacrificed to support his success, only to be cast aside. The divorce was contentious. David fought me on everything, particularly the real estate investments. His lawyers argued that since his income had funded the purchases, he was entitled to the majority. My lawyer countered that my expertise and labor had transformed those investments into valuable assets. In the end, I managed to keep most of the properties, while David took the larger share of our liquid assets and retirement accounts. Those properties became my lifeline. Over the next decade, I built a comfortable life for myself and supported both children through college. I continued investing in real estate, growing my portfolio steadily. My divorce settlement weren't handouts. They were hard-earned compensation for years of supporting David's career at the expense of my own. Sophia always had a special place in my heart. My firstborn, sensitive and creative like me, but with an ambition that reminded me of her father. I wanted to give her everything I couldn't have: stability, opportunity, and freedom to pursue her dreams without compromise. When she graduated from college with a marketing degree and landed her first job in the city, I was bursting with pride. "Mom, I can't afford anything decent in this market," she lamented during one of our weekly brunches, scrolling through apartment listings on her phone. "Everything is either tiny rundown or completely out of my budget." I'd been considering what to do with the modest 2-bedroom condo I'd purchased in the trendy part of the city a few years earlier. It was one of my best investments, having appreciated significantly, but I'd been holding on to it, unsure whether to sell or continue renting it out. "What if you moved into my Parkview condo?" I suggested. The current tenant's lease is up next month, and I was thinking about selling, but you could live there instead. Her eyes widened. Are you serious? That place is gorgeous. But Mom, I could never afford the rent there. I waved my hand dismissively. We can work something out. Maybe a reduced rent to start. Something that works with your entry-level salary. What began as an offer to help my daughter establish herself turned into something more permanent over the next few weeks of discussion. I decided to gift her the condo, not just to live in but to own. I want to transfer the deed to your name, I told her over dinner at my house. Consider it an early inheritance. A foundation for your future. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. Mom, I don't know what to say. It's too much. It's not too much, I insisted. I worked hard to build security for you and James. This is just one property in my portfolio. And it would mean everything to know you have a place of your own. A valuable asset to start your adult life. In truth, it was a significant gift worth about $450,000 in today's market, but I wanted to give her this security, this freedom from housing insecurity that so many young people face. I knew what it was like to be financially vulnerable, and I wanted better for my daughter. What I didn't know then was how quickly gratitude can fade, especially when gifts become expectations. Sophia and Anthony met 6 months after she moved into the condo. He was from a wealthy family, ambitious and charming, working at a prestigious financial firm. Their relationship moved quickly. Within a year they were engaged. I was happy for her, though something about Anthony always felt slightly off to me. There was a coldness beneath his polished exterior, particularly in how he spoke about people he considered beneath him. His family is incredible, Mom, Sophia gushed during our monthly lunch. They have this amazing estate in Greenwich, and a summer house in the Hamptons. His father basically runs one of the biggest hedge funds in the country. That's wonderful, honey, I said, trying to match her enthusiasm. I'm looking forward to meeting them. The meeting with Anthony's parents, Gerald and Victoria Harrington, was scheduled as a formal dinner at their country club. From the moment I arrived, I felt the weight of their judgment. Victoria scanned me from head to toe, taking in my department store dress and modest jewelry with a barely concealed grimace. So, Gerald said after stiff introduction, swirling his scotch, Sophia tells us you're in real estate? The way he said it made it sound like I sold roadside produce instead of managing a substantial investment portfolio. Yes, I replied evenly. I've been investing in and developing properties for over 20 years. Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. How interesting. Self-taught, I assume. I actually have a degree in architecture from Cornell, I said, maintaining my smile. Though I've learned plenty on the job as well. The entire evening continued in this vein. Subtle digs and questions designed to establish that I wasn't quite in their league. They spoke of their family's prestigious connections, their son's trajectory toward partnership, and their expectations for the wedding. It was clear they viewed me as an unfortunate complication in their son's choice of bride. When the topic of the wedding venue arose, Victoria dismissed my suggestion of my brother's beautiful vineyard property. Oh, we couldn't possibly, she said with a laugh that felt like a slap. The Harrington weddings are always at the Belmont Club. It's tradition. We've already spoken to them about dates next June. I watched as my daughter nodded eagerly, not once considering that I hadn't been consulted about any of these plans, despite the traditional expectation that the bride's family would be involved. It sounds lovely, I said carefully, but I think these are decisions Sophia and Anthony should make together, considering both families' input. Gerald chuckled patronizingly. Of course. But you must understand there are certain expectations with families like ours. The Harrington name carries responsibilities. Later that night, I tried to talk to Sophia about how I felt sidelined in the wedding planning. Mom, she sighed, with an impatience I hadn't heard from her before. This is how things are done in their circle. The wedding is going to be spectacular. Isn't that what matters? Besides, they're covering most of the costs. I'm perfectly capable of contributing to your wedding, I said, hurt by her assumption. She patted my hand in a gesture that felt patronizing. I know, but there's no need. They want to do this their way, and honestly, it's easier if we just go along with it. In that moment, I realized that my daughter was choosing sides, and it wasn't mine. The wedding planning steamrolled ahead with minimal input from me. The Harringtons handled everything: venue, catering, guest list, flowers, all with an obvious budget that far exceeded what I could have provided. Each time I offered a suggestion or asked to be involved, I was politely but firmly relegated to the periphery. "We've already decided on the centerpieces," Victoria would say. Or, "The menu was finalized last week, didn't Sophia tell you?" My role diminished to simply receiving instructions, when to show up for fittings, which shade of blue my mother of the bride dress should be, to complement their color scheme, and how many guests I could invite, a mere 20, compared to the Harringtons' 200. The weekend before the wedding, Sophia called me, sounding stressed. "Mom, there's been a small change of plans for the rehearsal dinner," she began, her voice unnaturally bright. "The restaurant can't accommodate all the out-of-town guests like we thought, so we're moving it to your house." I nearly dropped my phone. "My house? Sophia, that's more than 50 people. Why wasn't I consulted about this?" "It was a last-minute thing," she said dismissively. "Victoria suggested it since you have that big backyard and the nice kitchen. We already told everyone, so we can't change it now." "And who's catering this event at my house that I'm just now hearing about?" There was a pause. "Well, we thought maybe you could handle that part. Victoria mentioned you love cooking, and it would be your contribution to the wedding festivities." I sat down, feeling like the wind had been knocked out of me. They expected me to host and cater a rehearsal dinner for 50 people with less than a week's notice. "Sophia, that's not reasonable. I'm not a caterer, and this isn't how you plan events." Her voice turned cold. "God, Mom, why are you being so difficult? The Harringtons have paid for literally everything else. The least you could do is host one dinner. It's my wedding." I closed my eyes, counting to 10 silently. "Fine. I'll make it work." And I did make it work, at considerable expense and exhaustion. I hired help at the last minute, spending thousands I hadn't budgeted for. I cleaned my house top to bottom, rented tables, chairs, linens, and dinnerware. I worked with a friend's catering company who squeezed me in as a personal favor. Through it all, I kept reminding myself, this is for Sophia, not the Harringtons. The night of the rehearsal dinner, Victoria swept through my front door, surveying my home with the scrutiny of a health inspector in a questionable restaurant. "Quaint," she pronounced, running a finger along my dining room table. "I suppose it will do for one evening." Throughout the dinner, the Harringtons and their friends formed tight conversational circles that excluded me. In my own home, I moved among my guests, refilling wine glasses and ensuring everyone was comfortable, feeling more like the hired help than the mother of the bride. Near the end of the evening, I overheard Victoria speaking to another guest in my kitchen. "Yes, it's the mother's contribution," she was saying with a slight smirk. "Since she couldn't quite manage her portion of the financial arrangements, one does what one can, I suppose." My cheeks burned with humiliation and anger. I had gifted my daughter a nearly $500,000 property, was running myself ragged hosting a dinner I'd been manipulated into providing, and was being painted as the financially inadequate parent. The day of the wedding arrived with perfect weather and military precision scheduling. I was instructed to arrive at the Belmont Club at exactly 11 a.m. for hair and makeup, specifically styled to Victoria's approved aesthetic for the bridal party. When I arrived at Sophia's preparation suite, she was surrounded by her bridesmaids and Victoria, who was supervising the makeup artist's work with hawk-like attention. "Mom!" Sophia called out, her face lighting up momentarily. She looked beautiful, half ready in her silk robe with her hair partially styled. "You're here." Victoria barely acknowledged me with a nod before turning back to the makeup artist. "Remember subtle contouring. Nothing too dramatic." I moved to kiss my daughter's cheek, but was intercepted by the hair stylist. "Sorry, we can't disrupt the process right now. Time's tight." For the next 2 hours I sat in a corner of the suite, watching as everyone fussed over my daughter. Occasionally, Sophia would meet my eyes in the mirror and smile, but she was caught up in the whirlwind of preparation and the constant stream of instructions from her future mother-in-law. Finally, it was time for Sophia to put on her dress, a designer gown that cost more than my first car. As her mother, I expected to help her into it to have that traditional emotional moment together. Instead, Victoria stepped in. "I'll help her," she announced. After all, I did help choose it. I watched, throat tight with unshed tears, as another woman helped my daughter prepare for one of the most significant moments of her life. When Sophia stood fully dressed, radiant in white lace and satin, Victoria clasped her hands together. "Perfect," she declared. "Every inch a Harrington bride." Not Reynolds. Harrington. As if Sophia's identity, her history, her connection to me had already been erased. The ceremony itself was beautiful, I have to admit. No expense had been spared, with cascades of white orchids and roses, a string quartet, and the kind of opulence that made guests murmur in appreciation. I walked down the aisle alone to my designated seat in the front row, acutely aware of the divide between the two sides of the chapel, my modest gathering of friends and family dwarfed by the Harrington Society connections. When it came time for the reception, I discovered that I wasn't seated at the main table with the bride, groom, and the Harringtons. Instead, I was placed at a table near the kitchen doors with distant relatives of Anthony's family. "It's just the logistics of the table arrangements," the wedding planner explained when I quietly inquired. "The head table couldn't accommodate everyone. Everyone, it seemed, except me." I maintained my composure, smiling through introductions with people who clearly had no idea who I was. Halfway through the main course, a server approached me. "Mrs. Reynolds? There seems to be an issue with one of the guests at table 14. They're requesting to speak with the mother of the bride about their meal." Confused, I followed the server across the ballroom to a table where an elderly woman was frowning at her plate. "This isn't what I ordered," she complained when I approached. "I specifically requested the vegetarian option because of my dietary restrictions." "I'm so sorry," I said, "but I'm not involved with the catering arrangements. Let me find someone who can help." "Aren't you in charge here?" she interrupted. The young man said to speak to the mother of the bride about any problems. A cold realization washed over me. I glanced around and noticed several servers directing guests with complaints my way. At that moment, I caught sight of Victoria speaking with the catering manager, pointing subtly in my direction. She had instructed the staff to direct all complaints to me, positioning me as some kind of wedding coordinator rather than the mother of the bride. For the next hour, I found myself running interference between dissatisfied guests and the actual event staff, addressing complaints about temperature, seating arrangements, and meal preferences. I missed the toasts, the cake cutting, and my daughter's first dance because I was solving problems that weren't mine to solve. When I finally managed to approach Sophia during a brief lull, she was surrounded by Anthony's college friends, laughing at some inside joke. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" I asked quietly. She glanced at me, her smile faltering slightly. "Can it wait, Mom? We're kind of in the middle of something." "It won't take long," I insisted, gentle but firm. With a dramatic sigh that made my heart twist, she excused herself and followed me to a quieter corner. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "Why am I being treated like I work here? Guests are being directed to me with complaints about the food and seating." Sophia's face tightened. "Mom, don't make a scene. It's probably just a misunderstanding." "It's not a misunderstanding. Victoria specifically told the staff to send problems to me. I've spent the last hour handling complaints instead of celebrating with you." She rolled her eyes at me. "Victoria's been planning this wedding for months. If she delegated some responsibilities to you, it's probably because she has more important things to manage right now. More important than the mother of the bride being able to enjoy her daughter's wedding?" "Sophia, do you hear yourself? This is my only daughter's wedding day, and I've been relegated to handling complaints about undercooked chicken. I haven't even had a chance to eat my own meal, or take a single photo with you." "You're being dramatic," she hissed, glancing nervously toward her new in-laws across the room. "Just try to be helpful, okay? The Harringtons have a certain way of doing things, and you're making this harder than it needs to be." In that moment, something inside me broke. The daughter I'd raised, the one I'd sacrificed for and given everything to, including a home worth nearly $500,000, was looking at me like I was an inconvenience to be managed. "I understand," I said quietly, a calm settling over me that came from somewhere beyond hurt. "The Harringtons have a certain way of doing things, and apparently that includes treating your mother like the help." "Mom!" "No, it's fine." I cut her off, smiling falsely. "I'll continue to be helpful as requested. Enjoy your wedding, Sophia." I turned and walked away, my back straight and my eyes dry. I returned to the table where I'd barely touched my cold dinner, making polite conversation with strangers while watching my daughter and her new family celebrate from a distance. After another 30 minutes of directed complaints and pointed exclusion, I made my decision. Without fanfare, I gathered my small evening bag and wrap, nodded politely to the few guests at my table, and walked out of the grand ballroom. No one stopped me. No one even seemed to notice. In my car, I finally allowed the tears to come, not just for today's humiliations but for the gradual erosion of my relationship with my daughter that had led to this point. I had given Sophia everything: support, love, financial security, and somewhere along the way, she had learned that I was disposable, that my feelings and dignity were less important than impressing her wealthy in-laws. I drove home to my empty house, still decorated with the remnants of the previous night's rehearsal dinner. Kicking off my uncomfortable heels, I changed into pajamas, poured myself a generous glass of wine, and sat in my backyard under the stars. Tomorrow would require decisions and boundaries, but tonight I allowed myself to grieve. Because no matter what happened next, something precious had already been lost. The next morning, I woke with swollen eyes and a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I checked my phone to find several missed calls and angry text messages from Sophia, along with a few concerned messages from friends who had noticed my absence. "Where did you go?" Sophia's first text demanded. "Everyone was asking about you. How could you embarrass me like this?" Read another. "Victoria is furious. Call me immediately." I set the phone down without responding. The audacity was breathtaking. After being treated as nothing more than hired help at my own daughter's wedding, I was now being scolded for embarrassing her by quietly removing myself from further humiliation. I spent the day tidying my house and reflecting on how we had arrived at this point. Perhaps I had indulged Sophia too much, never setting proper boundaries or teaching her that relationships require reciprocity. Or perhaps the allure of the Harrington wealth and status had simply overwhelmed any values I had instilled in her. By evening, my phone buzzed with a call from James, my son. "Mom, what happened?" "Sophia's freaking out," he said when I answered. "I left the wedding," I replied simply. After being directed to handle guest complaints for over an hour instead of participating in my daughter's celebration, James was quiet for a moment. "That sounds awful. Are you okay?" His concern nearly broke me again. "I'm getting there," I managed. "How was the rest of the wedding?" "Honestly, pretty uncomfortable after people realized you were gone. Sophia spent half an hour crying in the bathroom with her bridesmaids. Victoria kept telling everyone you must have had some kind of episode. It was weird." I closed my eyes. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that." "Don't apologize," James said firmly. "I saw how they were treating you all day. I should have said something." We talked a while longer, and I felt grateful that at least one of my children still saw me as a person deserving of basic respect. 3 days later, Sophia and Anthony departed for their 2-week honeymoon in the Maldives. A wedding gift from the Harringtons. I still hadn't responded to Sophia's increasingly angry messages, deciding that any conversation between us needed to happen in person, when emotions weren't quite so raw. I used the time to consult with my attorney about some paperwork I needed to address. The meeting was brief but necessary, and I left feeling more secure in my decision. The day Sophia and Anthony were due to return, I prepared myself for the inevitable confrontation. Sure enough, my phone rang that evening with my daughter's number. "Hello, Sophia," I answered calmly. "Mom, what the hell?" she launched in without preamble. "I've been trying to reach you for over 2 weeks. You left my wedding without saying anything, you haven't returned any of my calls or texts, and you've made me look terrible in front of Anthony's family." "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said, maintaining my composure. "How was your honeymoon? Don't change the subject. Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to have my own mother disappear from my wedding? Victoria had to explain to everyone that you must have been overwhelmed by the scale of the event." The condescension in her voice was palpable. "Is that really what you think happened, Sophia? That I was overwhelmed? What else am I supposed to think?" she snapped. "You abandoned me on the most important day of my life because, what, you couldn't handle not being the center of attention?" I took a deep breath. "I left because I was being treated as staff rather than as your mother. I was directed to handle guest complaints instead of participating in your celebration. I wasn't seated with you, wasn't included in photographs, and was actively prevented from sharing important moments with you. That's ridiculous, she scoffed. You're exaggerating. Am I? Did you know that I missed your first dance because I was resolving a dispute about seating arrangements? That I didn't get to eat my dinner because servers kept bringing guests with complaints to me? That Victoria specifically instructed the staff to direct all issues to the mother of the bride, because, in her words, I might as well make myself useful. There was a brief silence. I'm sure she didn't mean it that way, Sophia finally said, but her voice held a note of uncertainty. Regardless of how she meant it, that's what happened. And when I tried to talk to you about it, you dismissed my concerns and told me to be helpful. As if my only value at your wedding was in how well I could serve the Harringtons' vision. You're being dramatic, she insisted, but with less conviction now. Look, I'm sorry if your feelings were hurt, but you didn't have to leave. We can talk about this later. Right now, Anthony and I are trying to get into the condo, but our keys aren't working. Did you change the locks while we were gone? And there it was, the real reason for her call. Not concern for me or our relationship, but a practical problem that required my assistance. I didn't change the locks, I said carefully. But there have been some changes regarding the condo. What does that mean? We just want to go home, Mom. It's been a long flight. The condo is no longer available for you to live in, I stated clearly. You'll need to make other arrangements. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then, what are you talking about? The condo is mine. You gave it to me. Actually, I didn't, I corrected her. I offered to let you live there rent-free, but I never transferred the deed to your name. This was technically true. While I had initially intended to transfer ownership to Sophia, the paperwork had never been finalized. Between her whirlwind romance with Anthony and the increasingly disrespectful dynamic between us, I had hesitated, then ultimately decided against it. That's not true, she sputtered. You said it was my early inheritance. You promised. I discussed the possibility, yes, but legal ownership was never transferred. The property remains in my name, as it always has been. You can't do this. Her voice rose in panic and anger. All our things are in there. We're supposed to live there. Your personal belongings have been packed and are in storage, I explained. I've paid for the first month. You can arrange to collect them at your convenience. This is insane, she nearly screamed. Where are we supposed to go? You can't just take back a gift because you're having some kind of midlife crisis. I suggest you stay with Anthony's parents while you sort out your housing situation, I said evenly. I hear they have quite a spacious estate in Greenwich. You spiteful bitter. She cut herself off. I could hear Anthony's voice in the background asking questions. Anthony says his parents are in Europe for another week. We need somewhere to stay now. I understand that's difficult, I acknowledged. But as I said, the condo is no longer available. So that's it? You're just throwing your own daughter out on the street because you got your feelings hurt at my wedding. I sighed. I'm not throwing you out on the street, Sophia. You're a married woman with a husband from a wealthy family. You have options. This isn't about revenge for the wedding, although that experience certainly clarified some things for me. What things? She demanded. That somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as someone deserving of basic respect and consideration. That you were willing to let your in-laws treat me as inferior to accommodate their expectations. And that you'd only value what I could give you, not who I am to you. That's not fair, she protested, but her voice wavered. Isn't it? When was the last time you called me just to talk? Rather than to ask for something. When was the last time you considered my feelings before making decisions? The condo was meant to be a gift of love, to help you start your independent life. But if you see me as nothing more than a resource to be used, then I need to reevaluate what I'm willing to provide. I could hear her breathing heavily on the other end, trying to control her emotions. So you're punishing me, taking away something you promised because I didn't pay enough attention to you at my own wedding. No, Sophia. I'm establishing boundaries. There's a difference. You're an adult now, a married woman. It's time for you to build your own life without expecting your mother to provide the foundation. You'll regret this, she threatened, her voice cold. When you're old and alone, don't expect me to take care of you. The words stung, but they also confirmed that I was making the right decision. I've spent my entire adult life taking care of others, Sophia. I think I'll manage just fine. Goodbye for now. You can contact my attorney if you need to discuss the storage arrangements for your belongings. I ended the call before she could respond, my hands trembling but my resolve firm. The following weeks were a storm of angry messages, not just from Sophia but from Anthony and even Victoria Harrington, who had the audacity to call and inform me that my behavior was unbecoming, and that I was causing unnecessary distress to the newlyweds. Mrs. Reynolds, she said, her voice dripping with condescension, surely you understand that Sophia and Anthony planned their living arrangements around the understanding that they would reside in that condo. Gerald and I are extremely disappointed by this display. I appreciate your concern, Victoria, I replied, matching her formal tone. But this is a private matter between my daughter and me. Sophia is aware of the situation and the reasons behind it. Gerald has suggested that perhaps we could purchase the property from you. If this is about financial concerns, she continued, as if I hadn't spoken, we could arrange for a fair market valuation. This isn't about money, I interrupted firmly. And the property isn't for sale. If Sophia has led you to believe otherwise, that's unfortunate, but my decision stands. Victoria made a sound of disbelief. Well, I never. You do realize you're damaging your relationship with your daughter irreparably? All for what? Some petty revenge because you felt slighted at the wedding. I realize that healthy relationships require mutual respect, Victoria. Something that was notably absent in how I was treated by your family. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other matters to attend to. I hung up, knowing I had probably just deepened the rift between families, but no longer caring about maintaining appearances for people who had shown me such disregard. Sophia and Anthony ended up moving into the Harringtons' guest house, an arrangement that was meant to be temporary but stretched into months. According to James, who still kept in touch with his sister, the situation was far from ideal. Victoria micromanaged every aspect of their lives, from meal times to decor choices, and Anthony's father regularly lectured them about financial responsibility. She's miserable, James told me during one of our dinners together. Victoria criticizes everything she does, and Anthony's taking his parents' side on most issues. But she won't admit that she was wrong about how they treated you. I'm sorry she's struggling, I said sincerely. But this is something she needs to work through on her own. I can't protect her from the consequences of her choices anymore. 6 months after the wedding, I received an unexpected visit. I was in my garden planting fall bulbs when I heard a car pull into my driveway. Looking up, I was startled to see Sophia getting out alone. She looked different, thinner, more subdued, with none of the radiant confidence she had projected at her wedding. She approached hesitantly, stopping at the edge of the garden. "Hi, Mom," she said quietly. I set down my trowel and stood, brushing soil from my hands. "Hello, Sophia. This is a surprise." She glanced around the garden, taking in the neat rows of newly planted bulbs. "The garden looks nice." "It will be come spring," I replied, waiting for her to reveal the purpose of her visit. She shifted uncomfortably. "Can we talk?" I nodded and gestured toward the patio furniture. "Would you like some tea?" "That would be nice, thanks." In the kitchen, I busied myself with the kettle, giving us both a moment to collect our thoughts. When I returned to the patio with 2 steaming mugs, Sophia was staring at her hands, twisting her wedding ring nervously. "How have you been?" I asked, setting her tea in front of her. She looked up and I could see the strain in her eyes. "Not great, to be honest. Living with Anthony's parents has been challenging." I nodded, unsurprised. "I imagine it would be. Victoria has opinions about everything, how I dress, how I speak, even how I load the dishwasher," she said with a hollow laugh. "Nothing I do is ever right." "That sounds difficult," I acknowledged, careful not to sound too sympathetic or too vindicated. This moment wasn't about me being right. It was about Sophia learning something important. "Anthony and I have been fighting a lot," she continued. "He doesn't understand why I can't just get along with his mother. Says I'm not trying hard enough to fit in with their family." I sipped my tea, letting her talk. Last week, Victoria reorganized my closet without asking because she said it was chaotic. She threw out some of my favorite clothes because they didn't meet the Harrington standard. When I got upset, Anthony told me I was being ungrateful for all his parents had done for us. And how did that make you feel? I asked quietly. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. Like I didn't matter. Like my feelings and preferences were irrelevant. Like I was just a project for them to fix. The parallel hung in the air between us, unspoken but unmistakable. That sounds very frustrating, I said gently. She wiped at her eyes. I keep thinking about what you said, about me not seeing you as deserving of basic respect, about letting the Harringtons treat you as inferior. Her voice cracked. I didn't see it then, but I do now. I'm living it every day. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers, the first physical contact between us in months. Sometimes we have to experience something ourselves to truly understand it. I'm so sorry, Mom, she whispered, tears flowing freely now. For how I treated you, for how I let them treat you. I was so caught up in trying to belong in their world that I forgot who helped me become who I am in the first place. The apology was simple but sincere, and I felt something tight inside me begin to unravel. Thank you for saying that, Sophia. It means a lot to hear. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, she continued, or to give the condo back. I understand now why you did what you did. It wasn't about the property. It was about respect. I squeezed her hand. I never wanted to hurt you, Sophia. I just needed to establish boundaries that had been ignored for too long. She nodded, wiping her face with her free hand. I know. And I needed to learn that actions have consequences, even when they're not intentionally hurtful. We sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, sipping our tea and adjusting to this new, more honest dynamic between us. So what happens now? Sophia finally asked. With Anthony, with the Harringtons. With us? That depends on what you want, I replied. What do you see for your future? She took a deep breath. I don't know exactly. Anthony and I need to have some serious conversations about our marriage and his relationship with his parents. I need to figure out if there's a way forward that doesn't involve me giving up who I am. That sounds like a good place to start, I encouraged. As for us, she met my eyes directly. I'd like to rebuild if you're willing. I miss my mom. The simple admission touched me deeply. I'd like that too, Sophia. But it will take time and things will be different. I can't go back to how things were before. I don't want to go back, she assured me. I want something better. Something with more balance and mutual respect. I smiled, feeling cautiously hopeful for the first time in months. Then that's what we'll work toward. I should probably go, she said after another comfortable silence. Anthony will be home from work soon, and I need to talk to him about some things. I walked her to her car, and before she got in, she turned and hugged me. A real hug, tight and genuine, like when she was a little girl seeking comfort after a fall. I love you, Mom, she murmured against my shoulder. I love you too, Sophia. Always have, always will. As I watched her drive away, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, relief, cautious optimism, and a maternal protectiveness that had never really faded despite everything. Sophia had a difficult road ahead, navigating her marriage and the Harrington family dynamics, but she had taken an important first step by acknowledging the issues and seeking reconnection. Over the next few months, Sophia and I rebuilt our relationship gradually. Weekly lunch dates became a fixture, sometimes just the two of us, sometimes including James. We talked openly about the past and set clear expectations for the future. I listened as she worked through her struggles with Anthony and his family, offering advice when asked but respecting her need to make her own decisions. 3 months after our reconciliation, Sophia called with news. Anthony and I have found an apartment, she announced. It's small and it's a rental, but it's ours. No Harrington strings attached. That's wonderful, I replied, genuinely pleased. How did that come about? We had a major confrontation with his parents, she explained. Anthony finally stood up to them after Victoria criticized me at a family dinner. He said we needed space to build our own life, our own identity as a couple. They weren't happy, but they're coming around. I'm proud of both of you, I said. That couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, she admitted. But it was necessary. We're also starting couples counseling next week. There's a lot we need to work through if this marriage is going to succeed long-term. The maturity in her approach impressed me. That sounds like a wise decision. On the day they moved into their new apartment, I surprised them with a housewarming gift. Not a property deed, but a handmade quilt I had spent weeks creating, incorporating fabrics that held significance for Sophia throughout her life. "It's beautiful, Mom," she said, running her hands over the careful stitching. "I can't believe you made this for us after everything." "It's a fresh start," I told her. "For all of us." Anthony, who had been awkward and distant during our initial reconciliation, approached me with an outstretched hand. "Thank you, Catherine. And I'm sorry for my part in how you were treated. I should have done better." I accepted his handshake, nodding in acknowledgement of his apology. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As for the condo, I eventually did transfer ownership to Sophia, 2 years later, when our relationship had healed and stabilized, and when she had demonstrated the maturity to appreciate its value beyond the monetary. By then, she and Anthony had worked through many of their issues and had established healthier boundaries with the Harringtons, who had grudgingly come to respect their son's independent choices. The transfer came with no strings attached, but with a letter expressing my hope that the property would serve as both an investment in her financial security and a reminder of the importance of cherishing relationships over possessions. "You're really giving it to me? After everything?" she asked when I presented her with the deed on her 30th birthday. "I am," I confirmed. "But not because you expect it or feel entitled to it. Because I choose to freely and with love." She hugged me tightly. "I'll never take it or you for granted again." Looking back now, 5 years later, I can see that the painful rupture in our relationship was necessary for its eventual healing and strengthening. Sometimes love requires difficult choices, establishing boundaries even when it hurts, and allowing those we care about to experience the natural consequences of their actions. My relationship with Sophia today is deeper and more authentic than it ever was before. We communicate honestly, respect each other's boundaries, and value our connection for what it truly is, not what either of us can gain from it. I still maintain a polite but distant relationship with the Harringtons, who have mellowed somewhat with the arrival of Sophia and Anthony's daughter, my granddaughter Lily. Victoria occasionally makes comments that reveal her persistent sense of superiority, but they no longer have the power to wound me. I know my worth, and more importantly, so does my daughter. The greatest gift I've received from this journey isn't the restored relationship with Sophia, precious though that is. It's the knowledge that I finally practiced what I had failed to teach her earlier, that self-respect must precede respect from others, that true love doesn't enable harmful behavior, and that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to stand firm in our boundaries, even when it's painful. My name is Catherine Reynolds, and at 57 years old, I finally understand that the strongest foundations are built not on sacrifice alone, but on mutual respect, honest communication, and the courage to say enough when necessary. It's a lesson I hope to pass on to my granddaughter, not through words, but through the example of a woman who learned, however belatedly, to value herself.